Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel May E. Muro, and I'm your second reporter about the humanistic perspective. So, my topic is all about person centered theory. Person centered theory is all about Carl Roger. And Carl Rogers' concept of humanity remained basically unchanged from the early 1940s until his death in 1987. During the early years, his approach was known as non-directive, an unfortunate term that remained associated with his name for far too long. Later, his approach was variously termed client-centered, person-centered, student-centered, group-centered, and person-to-person. We use the label client-centered in reference to Rogers' therapy and the more inclusive terms person-centered to refer to Rogerian personality theory. We said that clearly formulated theories often are stated in an if-then framework. Of all the theories in this book, Rogers' person-centered theory comes closest to meeting these standards. So, there are two kinds of basic assumption. The first one is the formative tendency, and the second one is the actualizing tendency. So let's talk about the first one, the formative tendency. Formative tendency is believed that there is a tendency for all matter, both organic and inorganic, to evolve from simpler to more complex forms. For the entire universe, a creative process rather than a disintegrative one is in an operation. Rogers called this process the formative tendency and pointed to many examples from nature. The second one is actualizing tendency. Actualizing tendency, an interrelated and more pertinent assumption is actualizing tendency, or the tendency within all the humans and other animals and plants to move toward completion or fulfillment of potentials. The need for maintenance is similar to the lower steps on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the other one is there are two kinds also, the self and the self-actualization. So the self is an infants gradually become aware of their own identity as they learn what tastes good and what tastes bad, what feels pleasant and what does not. They then begin to evaluate experiences as positive or negative, using as a criterion the actualizing tendency. So the second one is self-actualization. So self-actualization is a subset of the actualization tendency and is therefore not synonymous with it. The actualization tendency refers to organismic experiences of the individual, that is, it refers to the whole person, conscious and unconscious, psychological and cognitive. Self-actualization is the tendency to actualize the self as perceived in awareness. So the next one is the self-concept. The self-concept includes all those aspects of one's being and one's experience that are perceived in awareness, though not always accurately by the individual. The self-concept is not identical with the organismic self. Portions of the organismic self may be beyond a person's awareness or simply not owned by the persons. For example, the stomach is part of the organismic self, but unless it malfunctions and causes concern, it is not likely to be part of one's self-concept. So the next one is the ideal self. So the second subsystem of the self is the ideal self, defined as one's view of self as one wishes to be. A wide gap between the ideal self and the self-concept, it indicates incongruence and a healthy personality. Psychologically healthy and individuals perceive little discrepancy between their self-concept and what they ideally would like to be. So the other one is the awareness and levels of awareness. So without awareness, and the self-concept and the ideal self will not exist. The symbolic representation, not necessarily in verbal symbols, of some portion of our experience, recognize three levels of awareness: The first one, some events are experienced below the threshold of awareness and are either ignored or denied. So the second is hypothesize that some experiences are actually symbolized and freely admitted to the self structure. And the third level of awareness involves experience that are perceived in a distorted form. So the next one is a denial of positive experiences. So the negative or derogatory experience that are distorted or denied to awareness. They may be distorted because the person distrusts the giver, or they may be denied because the recipient does not feel deserving of them. So the next one is becoming a person. The first one, an individual must take contact, positive or negative, with another person. That is, the person develops a need to be loved, like or accepted by another person, a need that Rogers in 1959 referred to as positive regard. If we perceive that others, especially significant others, care for, prize, or value us, then our need to receive positive regard is at least partially satisfied. So, positive regard is a prerequisite for positive self-regard defined as the express. So this conception is quite similar to Maslow's, and you're gonna see at chapter 10, nation, that we must satisfy our love and belongings needs before self-esteem needs can become active. But once we begin to feel confident and worthy, we no longer require a replenishing supply of love and approval from others. So the last one is the source of positive self-regard. Then lies in the positive regard we receive from others, but once established, it is autonomous and self-perpetuating. So, the next one is a barriers of psychological health, a condition of worth, incongruence, defensiveness, and disorganization. So, conditions of worth, that is, they perceive that their parents, peers, or partners love and accept them only if they meet those people's expectations and approval. So conditions of worth become the criterion by which we accept or reject our experiences. Our perceptions of others people's view of us are called external evaluation. This evaluation, whether positive or negative, do not foster psychological health, but rather prevent us from being completely open to our own experience. For example, we may reject pleasurable experiences because we believe that other people do not approve of them. And the next one is incongruence. The organism and the self are two separate entitles that may or may not be congruent with one another. Also recall that actualization refers to the organism's tendency to move toward fulfillment, whereas self-actualization is a desire of the perceived self to reach fulfillment. So this incongruence between our self-concept and our organismic experience is the source of psychological disorders. So the next one is, or the last one, is vulnerability. So vulnerability is the greater that incongruence between our perceived self or self-concept and our organismic experience. So the more vulnerable we are, Rogers in 1959 believed that people are vulnerable when they are unaware of the discrepancy between their organismic self and the significant experience. So the next one is the anxiety and threat. So vulnerability exists when we have no awareness of the incongruence within ourselves. Anxiety and threat are experienced as we gain awareness of such an incongruence. Anxiety, a state of uneasiness or tension whose cause is unknown. As we become more aware to the incongruence between our organismic experience and our perception of self, our anxiety begins to evolve into threat, that is an awareness that our self is no longer whole or congruent. So anxiety and threat can represent steps toward psychological health because they signal to us that our organismic experience is inconsistent with our self-concept. So the next one is defensive. Defensive is the protection of the self-concept against anxiety and threat by the denial or distortion of experiences inconsistent with it. The two chief defenses are distortion and denial. The first one is distortion. We misinterpret an experience in order to fit it into some aspect of our self-concept. We perceive the experience in awareness, but we fail to understand its true meaning. So in denial, we refuse to perceive an experience in awareness, or at least we keep some aspect of it from reaching symbolization. Denial is not as common as distortion because most experience can be twisted or reshaped to fit the current self-concept. So, the last one is disorganization. Disorganization can occur suddenly or it can take place gradually over a long period of time. Ironically, people are particularly vulnerable to disorganization during therapy, especially if a therapist accurately interprets their actions and also insists that they face the experience prematurely. In a state of disorganization, people sometimes behave consistently with their organismic experience and sometimes in accordance with their shattered self-concept, and uncomfortable with the terms neurotic and psychotic, preferring instead to speak of defensive and disorganized. So that's all. Thank you.